Everyone, it's JesterBell. I am about to see the Snow White film, and these are my companions. This is my not sister and my not brother. Would you guys like a few words? You are about to see the Infinity War of Rage Bait YouTube. How are you feeling, not sister? How are you feeling, not brother?
I might not be able to watch Walt's work again because I'm not to show my face in public.
Okay, that's all great. I think that they're really excited. Most exciting movie since Endgame. We've got a faded Snow White poster in the background there, and we will see you guys.
Faded because it's been up there since
It's been up there since 2022 or something. Anyway, we will see you on the inside.
I gotta be honest. You all know that I was starting to say that I think that the Snow White movie itself was not gonna be that bad because I thought that all the controversy was just around the meta of the movie. And as we got up to it, as we got closer and closer, I started to stop having things to say about it because I thought, we've been talking about the same things for 2 years now. What more is there to be said? And even when the negative reviews started pouring in, I thought, what more is there to be said? It's probably going to be run-of-the-mill, terrible. How do you possibly mess up a Snow White movie? That is the question that I kept saying myself. How do you possibly mess up telling the story of Snow White? A story with perhaps 3 or 4 story beats to follow, story points. Well, I went last night with 2 other unfortunate souls that I roped in to watch the film with me, and I can say life finds a way. Somehow, Disney of all people discovered a way to mess up the storytelling of Snow White in what is probably going to go down in history as one of the most embarrassingly terrible car wrecks of a film ever made. That was a thought that kept popping in my head during this movie. Car accident. That and Madam Web. Yes, I was comparing it a lot to Madam Web in my mind. From that original weird interview with Rachel Zegler. What did you think the movie was going to be based on that interview? That is what the movie is. That movie is exactly what you would expect it to be from that initial Rachel Zegler interview. But that interview was all the more embarrassing now that she was so smugly talking about a film like this. This was like Infinity War for rage bait YouTubers. So I was very excited to go and see it. I can't say, though, I am saying that this is a terrible film, but I can't say that I wouldn't recommend you to go see it, but I would recommend you to go see it with a lot of friends because I had such a good time last night hearing my brother laughing at the film. He started laughing so hard at some of the stuff in the film. He had tears in his eyes. He wouldn't stop. And there were like 4 other people in the theater. 2 people walked out in the middle of it. And I understand why. But we were just making jokes during the film. And that was hilarious. But there were points where my unfortunate companions did tune out and just looked like they wanted to leave. Because this movie at only an hour and 49 minutes still feels like a century and 49 years. It is just incredible how a film this broken, this perplexing got made. And the only way I'm going to get through to describe to you all who I know are not going to watch the film how bad it is to do the Amelia Perez style review and just go scene by scene, shot by shot. So the film opens with sort of a nice storybook opening, and you wonder if it's really going to be that bad. And we hear about the story of this version of Snow White. Now, this is going to be a running theme throughout the review, is that this movie called Snow White desperately does not want to be Snow White. It does not want to tell that story because it thinks that every aspect of the original Snow White story was offensive and needs to be corrected. And that's what you get from the very first few minutes of this film, is that, so this is a king and queen and they give birth to a daughter. But because Disney wanted to do a Snow White with a mixed race princess, they can't have her have skin white as snow. To lighten the skin of a mixed race person would be offensive. And so they have it a new way of her becoming Snow White, that she was born in a snowstorm, and that's why she's called Snow White. She survived a bitter storm of snow, and that is why she's called Snow White. And I don't know why you would be called Snow White if you survived a blizzard. To me, that's like if you were born during a car crash and your parents called you car accident. But that's another story. It's just kind of an odd thing. But nevertheless, here we have our Snow White, who isn't Snow White, but she is Snow White because she was born in a blizzard, to a very mother who didn't look like the mother just looked very, very happy and very, very energetic when she had just had a child. Anyway, just a minor note. Then we get into the first song of the film, and it is terrible. And here is another aspect to this film that you have to know going in. This film feels like AI wrote it. It feels like a computer took elements from a lot of other modern Disney films and filled it up in here. Because this opening song sequence, Good Things Grow, reminded me just of the opening song sequence from Wish, Welcome to Roses, in that it's just a song about the princess walking through town and singing about what this town is. It's not going to have much relevance to what's happening in the story or in the future. It's just that the yokels who now work at Disney, they clearly have gotten rid of the people who always used to work there. They're just aping what they think Disney films are, and they're like, oh, Disney films need an opening song like Belle, where she's walking through the town and we describe things. They don't understand the lyrics of that song. They don't understand how it really set up the story and the characters. This song doesn't do it, and the lyrics are terrible, and this is another thing that keeps happening in the film. The way they integrate the songs, the way they'll come into the story and leave the story, is so random that it's cringeworthy. Like they sing this long song and then they take a break to introduce the evil queen, and then as the king is riding off, he starts singing the song again. Like it's just really badly integrated. All of the songs in this film, in addition to these 3 from the original, all of the songs though really are terribly integrated, terribly written into this movie, if you can call it that. It's just bad, but we're gonna take a long time to get there. Anyway, what you also need to know about this film is that it spends a whole lot of time on exposition. It's just describing things, because the original fairy tale was broad stroke and simple, and this needs to go into all of the lore of this kingdom. Like the king is this to these people, and he's fighting these people down in the south, and also there's the bandits, and the bandits are the people who have been living around in the wild and committing crimes in the king's name, and the dwarves have this magic that comes from their hands that helps them mine things that never comes up later. But that's the gist that I'm going to give you, is that this film spends a very odd amount of time of characters explaining the lore of this land, not even showing, but just explaining it with all of this exposition. A lot of it doesn't even become relevant, but that is part of the reason that needlessly convolutes the story of Snow White, as they're trying to add all this stuff in. But back to the story at hand. The king, Gal Gadot comes from, they say, a faraway land, and her beauty is able to cast spells, and she bewitches the land and bewitches the king. And then she sends him off to a war. She says that there's going to be a war and that he must go off to war and fight it. And so he rides off away from Snow White and is never seen again. And then the queen makes Snow White, she cuts her hair up into that awful bob that you see in the trailer and makes her work as a slave. And then finally, after all of that, we get to the present day and what is happening in the present day, where we finally get to meet Rachel Zegler herself in her grown-up form. Now, I want to say that one of the biggest criticisms for the original Snow White character is that she's super naive and she falls for things. I don't think that they remedied that there. Maybe they weren't trying to, but they make it out like after all these years of being treated as a slave, Snow White still trusts the queen enough to try to go and talk to her about things, and hasn't accepted about just how destitute the kingdom has come yet. I thought that was really odd. But then Snow White meets a thief named I don't remember his name, but he's the guy played by Andrew Burnap, who she said that maybe he'll get all his scenes cut from the film in the original, that guy.
Cast a guy in the movie, Andrew Burnap, great dude. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby.
Anyway, she meets this thief, and she tries to talk to the queen about getting the people food because he was stealing food. Doesn't work. So the queen ties Andrew up at the gate. And here's the funny thing: is they tie him up at the gate. They don't put to humiliate him and have him freeze to death, as she says, but they don't post a guard around him. It's right out in the open where everyone can see. And then Snow White runs up and just simply unties him and lets him go. And this is supposed to be a scene showing just how kind she is. It wasn't a lot of effort. And the queen is watching from behind and no one does anything. And I'm like, this is some hostage situation you've got here. They just tie him up in a loose knot up to the gate, and everything, someone can just come along and turn him loose. And so back to how this film just does not want to be Snow White. We then get some iconography about the evil queen saying, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And of course, the magic mirror starts to say Snow White because of how good she is. And it's like, this doesn't make any sense throughout the film because they've made what makes you fairest of all about how good you are, not how attractive you are. But they also say that the queen has been being told how attractive how she is the fairest of them all up to this point as well, until the mirror decided that Snow White was because of how good she was. And so it's like, well, then it doesn't work like that because this queen was clearly evil all this time. So why was she being called fairest of them all up to this point? But the magic mirror will have very little relevance to this story because this story just does not want to be a Snow White movie at all. We get Waiting on a Wish, which is a new I Want song from Disney. Once again, they don't understand why things worked in the past. They just understood that they were there. They changed Someday My Prince Will Come because that's racist to sing about wanting a prince, and they may turn it into Waiting on a Witch, which is just I Want song of I want to get out of this situation and be my father's daughter. That is what she is constantly talking about throughout the film. The melody is nice. None of the songs throughout this entire movie have any interesting choreography or setup. It's mostly people standing and singing. So that's that. But Gal Gadot, the evil queen, is mad at Snow White, and Gal Gadot, however you pronounce her last name, gives the cringiest, most embarrassing performance where sometimes it felt like she was playing things up too seriously, and other times in the film it's like they told her, stop taking it so seriously, you need to be campy, and she goes full camp and she can't pull it off, and it's just embarrassing. And the scene where she is talking to the huntsman to get him to go kill Snow White, her acting is so bad in that scene and so cringy, and it was unintentionally comedic how it was set up. My brother would not stop laughing starting with that scene. It was so funny. Anyway, that was the better part of the film. Now we're going to see how the film as a Snow White adaptation completely goes off the rails. So Snow White is taken off into the woods by the huntsman, and she is wearing the iconic Snow White dress and bob. And it feels completely out of place for this film. Because as we're going to see, they are going to really try to go with a girl boss angle to this character. And when they try to do that, and she's in a dress that looks like it was from Spirit of Halloween, and a bob that is so distracting, I can't take anything the character does seriously. I am constantly distracted by just how embarrassing that dress and that bob is. I mean, that's a huge problem with the film. The costuming of this film is overall terrible. I have never seen a Disney princess movie with a worse dress. It looks like something you would get from Walmart for a Halloween costume. It looks so bad. It looks so unfitting on her. The hair is inconsistent, as you can tell that there were reshoots in the film. It is really, really bad. But another thing is that when people were praising this film, I did see some people say that, well, Rachel Zegler gives a good performance. I am someone who I've seen Rachel Zegler in other stuff before this, and I thought that she would probably give a decent performance in this film, but I disagree having watched it. To be fair, she is not giving any material to work with, really. But here's the problem: is she's just so miscast. They keep talking up Snow White to be this character who's just so innately good and sweet, like the original, and that everyone wants to protect. But that doesn't really come off in her personality. Her personality is all too similar, I don't know, to Rachel Zegler in real life, to being just too modern. She's kind of just defined a little bit more, I don't know, by how spunky she is, I guess. She just doesn't give that innate goodness personality and the innate sweetness. So what happens instead is you'll get this moments like we get with the huntsman, where out of nowhere she'll offer him an apple, and you can really tell that the movie wants you to go, oh, look how kind she is. There's several moments like that throughout the film, and the writing is a problem too, but it's these moments that go, oh, just look how kind she is. And they come out of at these intervals just to make you think that, but it's like you don't get that from her personality constantly, which is what you should be getting. Like, it's so demented the way in the original, it's so easy to see. Snow White is in the field, she's picking flowers, you see how kind she is to a baby bird. The huntsman just sees how sweet she is, and he can't kill her. How do they possibly mess that up in this film, where instead the huntsman is going to kill her, but then out of nowhere she offers him an apple, and that makes him hesitate, and then he's going to kill her again, and then she's ready to go right into it and be brave, and then he backs off on it. It's like, and the way it's shot is so weird. It doesn't. I think all of the shots in this movie. There's so many flat angles where it's just two characters flat angle, staring one on the left side of the screen, one on the right side. It's not shot in a dynamic way. I just noticed how badly it was shot, and it doesn't really communicate. It takes longer to communicate what the original did much better in a shorter amount of time. And part of that is they don't let Snow White be the sweet girl that she is supposed to be. She needs to be, I guess, more of the girl boss. But I just didn't get much from her than, she's just Rachel Zegler. She didn't really feel like Snow White to me. It was terrible casting. But then it gets worse, because this is when whenever they try to dip it into the Snow White story, which this movie barely does because it doesn't want to be Snow White. It just comes out of nowhere, because then as she runs away, the forest she runs away into immediately fades into the whole sort of hellscape forest that you see in the original. Except in the original, it was clear that the forest was only so scary through her imagination. It slowly fades away. When she starts crying, she wakes up, all of the scary creatures transform into animals, and then there's a song about not being afraid. So it's very simply, very well communicated in the original. But in this one, they just make her run into the forest, and inexplicably, everything starts coming alive as these creatures. It's not explained at all if this is her imagination. It's not communicated well. And we get that sequence, and then she meets the animals out of nowhere, and then everything transforms into this magical land. And then there isn't any dialogue. There isn't any dialogue with her meeting the animals or talking about being afraid, communicating what on earth that was that we just saw. And then they just lead her away to a house, and she starts to go to sleep there with not a word is communicated here. It's like a fever dream. I'm like, why did they take away all the dialogue of these scenes? Was it offensive or something? Because that was the mindset of people who made this movie? I don't know, but I'm like, if you watch this and you're watching a movie that is just constant lore and exposition about this land, and then you're thrust into like this sequence of terror in the forest, and then everything transforms into cute animals and a green screen area of light and magic, and no dialogue is spoken, and all of a sudden she's led to this house and goes to sleep in a bed named Sneezy, Dopey, and Grumpy. Like, you have no idea what is going on in this scene. It's a fever dream all of a sudden. But the animals, without a word, for some reason, lead Snow White to the dwarf's house. And in the dwarf's house, she meets a rage bait YouTuber named Grumpy, who makes videos about Rachel Zegler all day long. I wish that was the story, but it's not. But once again, not a word is spoken. She just goes to sleep in there. And that is that. And then, oh, then we get a horrifying scene. Because then it's time to meet the dwarves. And so we cut away from this fever dream scene of Snow White, and the dwarves start marching on the scene, and they're singing hi ho, and they're fully CGI, and it's horrifying. Took for granted how horrifying these things would be on screen. The dwarves look like the Garbage Pail Kids in this movie. When they look at the screen, when Dopey was looking at the screen, it looked like he was staring into my soul. Oh my goodness, it was so scary. They do this extended version of Hi Ho, which they made worse than the original because of course they did, describing the dwarves' personalities, which is not going to come up much later because the dwarves barely do anything in this movie because this movie doesn't want to be Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But they sing about, working and how they have a special hand magic where they can touch rocks, and they touch the rocks and it lights up. And despite taking the time to explain that to us, it will never come up again in the film. But the entire sequence of Hi Ho with these freaky, uncanny valley, Mars needs moms, dwarves, goes on for like 3 minutes until you finally get away from that horror, and the dwarves go to their home and are horrified to find that Rachel Zegler is sleeping in their beds. Now, Rachel Zegler, once she wakes up and meets the dwarves, she immediately wants to leave. And they actually want her to stay when they find out who she is. She's the princess. Why? Because why did it have to be changed from the original where she was the one who wanted to stay and earn her keep as she was running from the queen? Well, because wanting to stay at somebody else's house is offensive. It's transphobic. It's racist. It's all of these things. You see, even when they go to the things that are elements of the original, they need to change them because they're offensive. It was offensive to have dwarves, even though there is a midget in this movie. It was offensive to have Snow White want to stay at somebody's house. That is phobic for something. But yes, that is what happens in the film. Snow White desperately does not want to stay at the dwarves' house because she wouldn't want to impose on them. I just started laughing like a maniac, but I'm just thinking of the people who made this movie, just looking at the original and just scoffing in horror. A person asks to stay at someone else's house. This can't be. This can't be so. Rachel is gonna, I'm just gonna call her Rachel, she's gonna leave the house, but the dwarves are kind of mean to Dopey, and so she stays and tries to encourage them to clean, and we get Whistle While You Work, which is extended and changed from the original, which is about her getting everybody else to clean. And I guess that's fine. They wouldn't have this about somebody herself cleaning the house because that's offensive. So she has to get everybody else to clean up, and the sequence is kind of cringy as well and is not very well shot, but it was better than the rest of the film. Forever you want to take that. So after she gets the dwarves to clean up, she says, time to go our separate ways because Snow White will not be imposing and stay at a dwarf's house, even though they desperately want her to stay. So the dwarves are going to go off to work, and Snow White is going to run through the forest as far away from the evil queen as she can. And meanwhile, the evil queen has discovered that Snow White is still alive, and so with hiring Gal Gadot, with hiring probably the worst actress of our generation, they decided it would be a great idea to give her a song in this film. I don't even need to describe it to you. I'm just gonna play you a little clip from the soundtrack.
And who, of course, is here to pick up the pieces? Well, nice will only get you nowhere. Nice won't get the doing done. Ambitious girls must be vicious girls. And boy, they have fun.
They auto-tune Gal's voice so much. It is like nails on a chalkboard. And this is one of the points in the film where it's like the director told her to be as camp as possible and just really exaggerate in the facial expressions and all that she's doing. But Gal cannot pull it off. So it comes off so cringy and so unpleasant to the ears. The All Is Fair song, the worst villain song in Disney's history, from the lyrics to the lack of choreography to the actress to the singing. It is so awful. And I was just there like this the entire time. I like, how was this made? How did you spend 12 hours a day shooting this, 18 hours, and then you put this out and you thought that this would be a good idea. I think that the best Gal was in the movie was when she was playing it off stiff, but when she tries to be camp and tries to show emotion, it does not work. This was a cringeworthy sequence. Oh boy. But then because this story does not want to be Snow White, this is all about Snow White trying to find her father, Rachel, and she runs into Andrew from before, and he's a thief, and he sings to her what is probably the only other most cringeworthy song in the film, called Princess Problems. I'll play you a clip of that.
Sounds an awful lot like princess problems. Seems to me you got some princess problems. Ain't it crummy when folks won't share?
Yeah, we have to sit there through the song of them walking through the forest and sing this Princess Problems song. And they're trying to make just a little bit of tension between him and Snow White, that there might be eventually some sort of attraction there. And it does not work. The lighting in this scene looks like a student film, or it looks like a TV movie from the 80s. And Snow White's dress and bob just takes away from it completely. Like, I could not imagine anyone being attracted to this person if they're in that dress and bob. It looks so bad. It is just so distracting. The song is cringe, and here they're trying to build up this thing about how he thinks that she's just a princess who wants to see a prince, like all princesses. And but she's gonna prove him wrong. She doesn't want a prince. She is a strong, independent woman. And that's how it plays out, because then they get attacked. The bandits get attacked by the queen's men and women. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be uninclusive, whatever it is. And so they all get attacked, but Snow White somehow saves the day. I was kind of tuning out at this point, so I don't remember how. She rides a horse and she tries to help the bandits from the queen's men. And so this gives the Andrew a little bit more of a higher opinion of her. She has impressed him. You see, it's not acceptable to have a love interest who is a prince, but you can do the enemies to lovers trope. Like, it's so weird. That is like one of the only acceptable tropes of romance these days. Enemies to lovers. The people who kind of hate each other and are kind of mean to each other, who grow attracted to each other. Like, why is it unacceptable to have the original prince, but then this guy who's kind of a jerk to her and is a thief is acceptable as a love interest? Oh, but he shows his valor in a minute when he jumps out in front of an arrow and takes it to the chest to save Snow White, and then he is wounded. But you don't know if you're supposed to take this as a dramatic moment. Someone has just gotten shot and might die, because characters are making jokes about it and making it lighthearted throughout the entire sequence. But they bring Andrew back to the dwarves, and there's a funny sequence where they want Doc to come and heal him, but Doc says Doc is more of a name. He's not an actual doctor. But still, somehow, this scene is really awkward. It's really awkward because, like, the bandits that are with Andrew, one of them is dressed like she's from LA. She just looks like she has her LA clothes and she showed up to set one day. All of the costuming in this movie is really terrible. Frankly, Andrew looks like he's from LA as well. He's just wearing, like, a sweatshirt throughout the movie. Anyway, it's a really awkward scene where Andrew has been shot and they're making jokes about it, and they think that he's dead because of Doc, and he says that he thought he was gonna die, but he's not. Doc somehow healed him. We don't know how, and it's honestly awkward to think about how or why or any of this, but Andrew is alive. And then comes the scene in the film where I lost it, because there's this big sequence where they're happy that Andrew is alive, and they gave it just a little bit of gravitas for a second there, but then out of nowhere, I can't emphasize this enough, out of nowhere, a dwarf says, "Well, it's time to dance," and all of a sudden it's just like, I'm serious, and I just lost it. They do the silly song dance in the middle, and like literally no character questions it. Literally everyone just starts dancing and partying out of nowhere in the film just to get that song in. Oh, but it's not done there. Then this is where I think the reshoots can come in. And the reshoots you can always tell because Rachel's wig changes from the ugly bob to a little bit more styled bob, like they were trying to fix that after criticism. So, in the midst of all of this, there is a love song, and it is also equally cringe, and it does not work in the film. In the original, I know that they added in the stuff with the love story after the backlash because it just seems very reactionary to people taking Rachel Zegler's comments that way and thinking, oh, people want a romance, so they put it in. Here's what doesn't work about it. In the original, it worked because it wasn't meant to be a developed romance, and it made no pretense of being that. It was supposed to just be a broad stroke idea, broad brush idea of finding true love and having that be your reward at the end. Wasn't supposed to develop the prince, wasn't supposed to develop the relationship beyond that broad idea. But this movie, with all of its constant exposition, is trying to be the modernized version. It's trying to give development, but it clearly just tacked this on as a reaction in reshoots. So now when they're all of a sudden like, oh, Snow White and Andrew have fallen in love. It's like, we didn't really see that. Maybe there was a little tension there, but this love song and trying to convince the audience that there's something there comes out of nowhere, and it doesn't have the development that the movie thinks that it got, and they have zero chemistry, and I don't think that they were meant to in the first place. So, this love story sequence is just painful, just so painful to watch. And it's of course still the approved modern day love story. Like it has to be you can have the bad boy guy and you can have it be like this. It needs to be the safe, tame love story of today. And except it's not really that because they didn't develop it. But anyway, the sequence is interrupted, and I can't even remember. I think I checked out at this point in the film, but let's just move on with this now. As you can tell, the story of Snow White has gotten needlessly convoluted. We barely spent any time on the actual story of Snow White. There's no evil queen jealous of her looks. There's actually barely any dwarves in this movie. Snow White isn't Snow White beyond the name and the awful dress that she's wearing. We've spent a good amount of the film focusing on weird fever dream sequences, bad songs, and this subplot about bandits. And the entire movie is not about Snow White, fairest of them all. It's about Snow White wanting to find her father again and realizing that the queen sent him away and that she'll never see him again. That's what the film is about. It's about her being her father's daughter. And that's why apples are made into such a thing in the film, because that's what they used to do. They used to pick apples together. They used to make things together. So, one thing leads to another. The dwarves go off and do their dwarfish stuff, and Andrew gets kidnapped by the evil queen at some point. And with that, the evil queen decides to take matters of her into her own hands and decides to poison Snow White. And this scene made me lose my mind when I watched it because they have to do the sequence from Snow White where the evil queen disguises herself and wants to poison the princess. But they can't have for it be her wishing on the apple because she wants to find true love, because that is racist, that is sexist, that is Islamophobic. We can't have that in a movie. So what they do is they have the evil queen come into witch form and talk to Snow White with the apple and warn her that Andrew has been kidnapped and she needs to go save him. And so Snow White takes up and is about to go try to save Andrew. But the evil queen says, but you have to take this apple for your journey so that you'll have something to eat on the way. And it's what your father would have wanted. And then there's this long sequence of her being like, take the apple, take it, it's what your father would have wanted. But it doesn't work here because you ruined the context. In the original, it was her convincing her that the apple will make her dreams come true and manipulating her with that. Here, it's like, hey, take an apple on your journey. And it's like, it should be like, okay, take the apple. Maybe you take a bite on the way. Maybe you drop it. But no, they have completely destroyed this storyline. And so now it's like she's hesitantly about to take a bite of the apple that this woman is just giving her for her journey. It's not about making a wish or anything. It's like you could eat the apple later. You don't have to eat it right then. You don't even have to eat it at all. It was just such a weird sequence where she's trying to coax her based on her father. And then, of course, Snow White is poisoned and falls ill. Now, the only thing I will accept about this sequence is that they did my favorite scene from the original movie, the thirsty have a drink scene.
Thirsty? Have a drink.
When I was younger, I had lore about who that skeleton in the bottom of the Evil Queen's castle was. I wondered if it was Snow White's father. I think that it was the audience members seeing the dead skeleton on the floor. That was me. I felt seen seeing that skeleton crawling out of the dungeons trying to get out for this movie. That's what I felt like. So the movie gets 100% 10 out of 10, 2 thumbs up for doing that sequence of that thirsty, have a drink, because that is my favorite sequence. But anyway, now we finally get to maybe the story trying to be Snow White. Now, this sequence is a reshoot. How do you know? Because everything appears to be shot on green screen, terrible green screen, like it was rushed. Snow White's bob is completely different, like a different wig, like they were trying to fix it. And what happens is Andrew and the huntsman escape from prison to save Snow White, and he gives her the true love's kiss to wake her up and all of that. Here is the problem. This is clearly a reshoot because in the scene where the evil queen is casting the spell, she doesn't even read that true love's kiss is the cure for the spell. There's no setup with that, and so therefore this is not payoff for that. It just comes out of nowhere, and the kiss is so awkward, both when it happens to a sleeping Snow White. Here's how you know for sure that this was a reshoot. There's been a rule in Hollywood. I think this is true. I've heard it from people who work in Hollywood. Sometimes I get emails who say that there's been a rule in Hollywood that you cannot have men be the ones initiating kisses in films. It has to be the woman. And I think that that's true because as I've watched films since then, I've noticed that, yeah, it's never the man who initiates a kiss in modern day films. So this is for sure a reshoot. This is the first time I've seen a man initiate a kiss in all these years. And we know that it's a reshoot because this is what Rachel Zegler was saying was creepy. A man initiating a kiss from a sleeping woman? Or what is that? So he does that. That is clearly a reshoot. It isn't paid off because their relationship has not been built up to what this film wants it to be. And they didn't even build up that true love's kiss is going to save the day. That has not been a theme in the film. That has not been set up as something that would cure the spell. It's just there. And then they do, when she wakes up, they do kiss afterwards, and it feels so forced and awkward, like they didn't want to do it. It's so obvious. But this brilliant, lovely film is not done yet, because then we need to get the ending sequence of an uprising from Snow White. And this is where the AI filmmaking comes in all over again. Remember the scene at the end of Wish where Asha is just, at the end of the day, the way that she defeats the king is just she gets all of the people in the town to stand up with her, and that's all that's ultimately needed? That is what happens in this embarrassing final sequence. Snow White comes forth in a red cloak, a bright red cloak for all to see, walks throughout the town, sings a song, and gets everyone to walk with her up to the gates of the queen. The queen, and this is what I laughed, is Snow White is standing in the middle of town. They set up that there are crossbows lined in the castle. And the evil queen leans over the balcony, and I'm like, all the evil queen needs to do is grab a crossbow, shoot it at Snow White, and kill her, and that's the end of the movie. And I wish that would have happened. That would have been so funny, but it's not. Now, they can't do a big sword fighting scene or a big fight scene or all of that. They don't have the budget for that. So what they do is they have Gal and Rachel basically talk down to each other. Gal talks down to Rachel, and basically, I'm trying to think of the film. Like, how did they resolve everything again? Basically, it's just because the people stop listening to Gal, the evil queen. They decide that they won't listen to her commands to kill Snow White, that they just won't listen to her anymore, and that she has no more power, and the midget from Andrew's gang shoots her hand with a crossbow so she doesn't have her power anymore, and she goes into the magic mirror area and asks the mirror again, who is the fairest of them all, is mad at him for saying Snow White splices the mirror and kills herself, and that is how it ends. And then there's a nice dance sequence at the end with everyone wearing white, and it's not a marriage or anything like people thought it was going to be. It's just a dance sequence, and then the movie is thankfully over. What a garbage film. This film is like something you would watch at the end of the apocalypse. Like, you've got the buildings falling, you've got society collapsing, and you're sitting in a theater and you're watching Rachel Zegler's Snow White. This is the most perplexingly awful movie that I think I've ever seen from Disney. It felt like a bunch of students putting on a parody of Snow White because everything feels like a parody of itself. It felt like a TV movie from the 70s that you weren't supposed to watch. It's so awful on every level. The acting from everyone was awful in this movie, could not embody the characters. Rachel Zegler has a nice singing voice, but the songs were cringy and terrible. And the love story that was shoehorned in response to criticism was forced and just that, shoehorned. The actor and actress had no chemistry. They felt like they didn't want to do it. And just, it's so, the dwarves were horrifying in the film. I don't know what message this was supposed to be giving, like just be brave and true, I guess. It's so shallow. The original Snow White was a far more well-drawn character and message than this movie. But it just astounds me how, once again, at every turn, this is exactly what you would think the movie would be based on those original leaks and interviews. Is that the problem with this movie is that it claims to be a Snow White movie, but it thinks that everything about the original Snow White was offensive. Everything needs to be changed. Snow White can't be Snow White because we can't have a Caucasian princess. Snow White, the evil queen cannot be jealous of another woman's looks because that's vanity, even though that was the entire point. Vanity is bad. Snow White cannot want to stay and earn her keep at the dwarf's house because it is offensive to want to stay at another person's house. Snow White cannot clean up for the dwarves because that is offensive to imply that a woman would ever want to clean up. Snow White, she can be in love because they heard that loud and clear, but it has to be with the bad boy who's kind of a jerk to her. And it can't be built up because we didn't build up for that in the first place. Snow White cannot be a sweet, kind soul like we know in the original because she needs to be more empowering. She needs to be more girl bossy. And that's the real point of it. The only things that are really here from the original are some destroyed songs that are horribly integrated into the story and destroyed. Like, if I was a songwriter and I was supposed to do somebody else's work, like the original Snow White, songs that have literally lasted for 100 years, and I was supposed to work on them, I would be mortified. I would say we shouldn't do this because it's just gonna make it worse, and it does. Sorry, my brain exploded for a minute. Yeah, like I said, it is everything that that original controversy would tell you this film would be. That it's run by people who think like Rachel Zegler, that think that basic fairy tale storying is all offensive and things need to be changed and fixed. But these people have no skills, so they can't change them or fix them. They just make something worse. You can do an empowering story of Snow White. You can do one that has more action in it and more story and maybe more development for the romance. They've done that before on the Once Upon a Time show and so many other things, but this one can't do that. It's just a clown show with no ideas about how to actually do a not Snow White story. It feels like an amalgamation of current Disney films where they try to give an I Want song, try to give a town song, try to shoehorn in things that they think sound like Disney movies, but they have no idea what the core and craft behind those classic Disney films were. So what you get is this terrible a destruction of it, this deconstruction of Disney movies, where it's just like talentless hacks aping what great people made before. This film is unwatchable. As much as me, my brother, and sister were laughing at it, it was unwatchable. This is not going to pick up at the box office. This is going to be month 3 of things bombing at the box office because you listen to people with the mindset of Rachel Zegler behind the scenes, the thing that everything is offensive, everything needs to be changed, everything needs to be fixed, and you don't listen to your core audience. The reason why this movie got so much backlash is the core audience doesn't want it. They never had a problem with the old stuff. They didn't want things to be fixed. They don't think like this. They don't think of, oh, dwarves are offensive, love is offensive, living in someone else's house is offensive. They don't think like that. You keep listening to idiots like Rachel Zegler who think like that, and this is your result. You've destroyed your entire industry, coming up with things like Brave New World and all of Wish and all of these garbage films that are giving the audience the opposite of what they want. There is no modern audience that wants this garbage, and this is garbage. This is a car wreck of a film. It is embarrassing. It will be watched in the future at bad movie nights at friends' house for people to laugh at it, but it's not gonna make you guys any money. You've just destroyed your industry over films like this. How do you mess up a story as simple as Snow White? Why is it that hard to make a movie like this? I imagine I will have a lot more to say in the future, but my assessment to you, to all of you, is that yes, all of the controversy around Snow White was 100% justified. Why? Because this is the pinnacle. This is the buildup of years of these galaxy-brained PC nut jobs coming off of all of old stories and thinking that they need to be fixed, but they're really just making them worse. They come, it's like Sid from Toy Story, who says that he's gonna fix your dolly, and he winds up just stitching a dinosaur's head on it and mutilating it.
Janie's all better now.
That is what happens with Disney films and these projects and the modern day Disney films. They take things you like that were perfectly fine, tell you that no, you don't like this isn't the correct thing, we're gonna fix it for you. They take it behind the scenes and they mutilate it and they give it back to you. That is what modern day Hollywood is, and that's why everyone has abandoned it. There's just so much more I could say about all of this film, just how terrible it is, how ridiculous it is, how this is just so indicative of how far Hollywood has fallen. They've destroyed themselves. They do not listen to their audience, and the result is this film, this brain-dead, tone-deaf movie that couldn't even succeed at telling the basic story of Snow White. Thank you for this video. There is going to be more videos on Snow White in the future. Thank you for watching. Thank you, patrons, as always, for supporting my work. I will have more videos talking about this in the near future and talking what I want to do to try to save the art of filmmaking. Please stay tuned for that, or you can watch my playlist of short films. You can watch my video I just did on Rogue. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys. I mean, I should feel accomplished with finally getting to watch the Snow White movie, but it's just confirmation about what has happened to the industry. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.